You're live.
Hey everyone, welcome to Free Assange Vigil. This is week 58 on a Saturday. My name is Steve Poikinen. I'm joined by my co-host Andrew Smith. We will be bringing in this morning's guest, Kevin Gosztola, here in a moment. But first, let's run through the numbers. Today is 3,539 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange, 492 days since the WikiLeaks founder was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the United Kingdom for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. 22 days remain until the second phase of the extraordinary rendition hearing of Julian Assange. Maybe. Today marks 1,170 days of incarceration in federal custody for Reality Winner. The bright side to all of this madness is that Chelsea Manning is enjoying her 154th day of freedom. Like I just mentioned, we're about 3 weeks away from returning to DC to hold demonstrations, events, panels, and protests. We are going to do this regardless. So we are still crowdfunding for that. We have a GoFundMe. We will make sure that those links get put into the chats a few times during the show. And the this week's call to action, if Andre wants to talk about that, it is up on the website right now. So
Absolutely.
Let me kick it over to Andre.
So this is the call to action that I'm dropping in chat right now is the first of this week's. There's actually going to be two as we lead up into the what hopefully or maybe or could be the second round of Julian Assange's extraordinary rendition hearings. This week, or the first part of this week particular, is reaching out to the ASLEF, which I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's a drivers union over in the UK. They have about 20,000 members. This is a story that we're going to touch on a little bit later, maybe, just depending on time. But essentially, one of the union members submitted a letter to the general secretary, which is like the chair, so to speak, in like American politics and places, the person in charge of the union from the collective elected standpoint. And what we want to do, and what I hope that we can do as a community, is to amplify this person's letter, because one person sending a letter can easily get lost. But when one person sends a letter and then 50 people follow up, resending that letter and showing why support for Julian is important, it could go a really long way. So on our website and in the chat, I put in the link. It's the call to action week 59, part 1. And this has multiple email addresses from different people within the ASLEF. And then it also has the information that would be really good to share. It has a link to the open letter that the member put out. It has the statement from the National Union of Trade Journalists in support of Julian Assange. And it also has the actual trade unionist press release that the DEA campaign put out once the trade unions got on board with the Free Assange campaign. So those are three really powerful pieces that if we get them out to the ASLEF, we have a real chance of having them come out in support of Julian, because they are, and I would like to point everybody to their website, because they are actually a really interesting union to read about. I don't know too much about them, so I can't say if they're the greatest or the worst thing ever, but they're just really interesting. So if you could, please join us with that. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our very special guest for this Saturday, Kevin. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey, it's good to be with you again.
Wonderful. So yesterday we had a bunch of crazy shit happen with the court case. And there's a lot of, it's a huge thing to start with to get into all of it. So I just want to lead in with the very beginning and the part that I find most troubling beyond everything else. And that's what we had started talking about just before we went live, which is the way that they're preventing journalists from actually accessing Julian's trial and being able to hear the court proceedings. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm based in Chicago, so I have a personal reason for being upset about what happened yesterday, because I lost sleep trying to get up to cover Julian Assange's case management hearing, which I knew was only going to take about 15 minutes of time. And then I expected to go back to sleep for a few more hours before I got up to do whatever work I had to do on Friday. But it was not that simple. When I called in at 3:50 a.m. In the U.S., I mean, I assume other American journalists as well were calling in this early to pay attention to this 10 a.m. hearing in the UK. They were on a conference call that was either the wrong number, so we were in the wrong courtroom, and in fact, at one point, I think, potentially violating the privacy of a criminal defendant in the UK because I had no business hearing their proceedings, but I was able to hear some hearing in the case of Danny Matthews, who I have no idea what that person is going through, but I probably should have been asked what business I had listening to this proceeding, and they just let me into it. And then I left because that was the wrong courtroom. Although, oddly enough, Emma Arbuthnot was overseeing that hearing. So I thought I might have been in the right place, but there was something happening before Julian Assange was going to have his case management hearing. I mean, I know Vanessa Baretzer is overseeing, but I just thought maybe something strange could be going on. And then it turns out that the prosecution didn't show up at 10 a.m. They just weren't there. So everyone was kept waiting and waiting. The defense did take advantage of this time to talk with Julian Assange over a video call, which I understand that initially, according to Juan Passarelli and others at the court, that Belmarsh hadn't prepared the defendant for this hearing, so he needed to be moved. And eventually there was a video call that his legal team had with him, which, rare interaction, especially over the last 5 months, as they've been very restricted in what they're able to do to communicate with him. And then time went by, and about 11, the prosecution was having trouble, and they needed a representative to patch in. Something was wrong with the line. And eventually they got in, and the prosecutors acted like the time for this hearing was always at 11 p.m. Even though the defense was ready to go at 11 a.m., even though the defense was ready to go at 10 a.m. And then I also realized that on the schedule, somehow it was 3:45 p.m. that the court was thinking they might be reviewing this case for the case management hearing. I mentioned all of those very, very minute details because it gives you a sense of the chaos of what's happening in this hearing. It's just so all over the place, and the judge doesn't seem to have any organization over this matter, and basically letting the U.S. government run her courtroom while everything is unfolding. And so it wasn't until 11 o'clock that everything started, and no journalists on this conference call were able to follow this proceeding. None of them were able to do firsthand reporting on it yesterday. It was just 15 or 20 minutes of time, but there were important developments that happened, which I'm sure we'll get into here this hour. But, someone, it was John Reese, I think, that got on our call and told all the journalists they're having the hearing, and we're obviously in the wrong call, or they're not patching us in and they just don't care about us. So everyone started leaving. And that's when you had people who have been observers like Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders pointing out how awful and horrible and difficult it has been to follow this. And she has no other case that she can compare it to in her life where it's been so difficult to follow the proceedings and report on them. And, there were only 5 journalists that were allowed into the courtroom because of social distancing measures that are in place during COVID, which is an issue that will remain for the upcoming September 7th hearing. And I should say, in the last thing related to this, that we don't actually know for absolute certain, that there will be a September 7th hearing. We just know it is still on the calendar. There was a curveball thrown, or there was an open issue that was left hanging at the end of this proceeding that might end up delaying or adjourning that hearing.
We've got in our show doc just the quick article from the DEA campaign, sort of detailing what happened and what it might look like going forward into September. So I want to touch on that just a little bit, and then get your thoughts on this, Kevin. So here's what went down. Attorney General William Barr issued a replacement extradition request 2 days after Julian's defense team submitted their full and final evidence for the extradition hearing due in September. The clear attempt to blindside the defense by U.S. Attorney General William Barr emerged as the court heard Julian Assange has not even seen the warmed-over extradition request, which contains no new charges, but introduces new narrative content that the defense argued should be excluded from the proceedings. The defense argued the replacement indictment introduced alleged conduct from 2010 and 2011, which the U.S. had investigated almost a decade ago, and could therefore not plausibly be argued to be new information to the investigation. The defense was given a week to decide whether to ask for the September hearing to be adjourned or to proceed as planned on 7th September. I want to stop right there because the onus now, it seems, has been put on the defense as to whether or not they will go forward with the September 7th hearing, making them ultimately responsible for what happens to Julian should the trial be postponed, which seems insane to me.
I think it's a way to psychologically attack not continually just him, but also his legal team. Because now they're put in a position where they either have to personally make the decision to keep Julian, at least that I would feel if I was in that position, to almost keep Julian in that 23-hour, 24-hour a day solitary confinement inside of Belmarsh, or run the risk of going to trial not even knowing what evidence is now presented against you. So I think that this is a fucked up tactic by the court to literally torture his legal team into having to decide in what way the state gets to torture Julian. So, and that's kind of strong language, I guess, but I think that's kind of the state's play here is now, okay, well, the legal team now has to decide how long this charade is going to go on because process has been abused so much.
Well, I think what needs to be made clear is that at every step of the way, you have a magistrate court judge who is not exercising her authority to make sure that a defendant's rights are protected in her courtroom. And I raise an older example in my commentary that I shared yesterday. I'll reiterate it, and we've talked about it here, but it still astounds me that he has to sit in that glass box if they're going to have these hearings in the courthouse, and especially if they were going to do it where they did in Woolwich, at the Woolwich courthouse, because that was a huge issue back in February, saying he wanted to sit with his attorneys and he couldn't follow the proceedings. He didn't really understand what was happening, and he wanted to be able to engage in the process and talk to his legal team and say, okay, well, this is what happened here, and I think you should ask this question, or I don't get this. Can you explain? Oh, okay, I get it now. You should ask this. So he's not able to do that because he's isolated. That's the way they organize the courtroom. And there have been cases that have objected to this way that everything is laid out and on human rights basis. And this judge just, offended that basically Julian Assange would challenge her and ask that his rights be protected to follow that. And these are due process issues we're talking about. So you're right that the responsibility has been placed on the defense and on Julian Assange here. Here's your choice. You can delay this crucial 3-week to 4-week hearing that is upcoming, in which evidence will be laid out on your case. And I think later on we should come back to this and I can flesh out specifically what we're looking forward to with the September 7th hearing. I think it's important for people who are looking at what faces the legal team to know what the nature of the September 7th hearing will be. I actually have a list of witnesses because it was in a public court document back in February about who they're going to call. So we know already what they're going to deal with that September hearing. But this crucial issue, what?
Do you have that list on hand of witnesses?
Yeah, I brought it. I have a notes that I put together.
After we finish the point that you were on, would you mind running through those again, just so we could put that out there?
Yeah, no, I think it's important to go through each of these individuals. If I don't need to give full bios for everyone, but I think it's important to get the picture of what this hearing is going to be for Julian Assange, because then you get this issue of putting the burden on the defense becomes more clear, because essentially it should not be on them to sort out this due process violation that has taken place. And so to be very clear here, he is currently in the Belmarsh security prison under the second indictment, which was the first superseding indictment. It's the one that had the 17 additional charges that were all violations, alleged violations of the Espionage Act. And that one does not exist anymore. It has been canceled, or it's null and void, because they issued a third superseding indictment with all of those charges, and I think some additional counts potentially. But more importantly, they expanded the scope of the case. This is something that the legal team has to deal with now, because earlier on, they were only responsible for managing what happened between Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning during the time frame in 2010 that was at issue in the case. But now they've added all of these narrative details about stuff that happened in between 2010 all the way on to 2015, including, this idea that he was involved in helping or recruiting systems administrators like Edward Snowden to get out of Hong Kong, and that they were engaged in source protection becomes an issue that is somehow criminal to the US government. And it's been put on them to sort this out, because he's been in this prison cell now for almost 2 months inappropriately, because they never brought him to a court and rearrested him. And I admit that this seems like a very, very minor thing, and practically speaking, I know what they're doing, and I understand that the prosecutors would claim that this is actually good for Julian Assange because he's not physically brought to the courthouse, and it limits the potential for him to contract COVID-19, which his lawyers have maintained he's at risk because of his history of respiratory illnesses and all kinds of other ailments that he's had. I think that's just an excuse, though. What they want to be able to do is violate this process that was set forward that said back in 2019, that was the last day you had to change the indictment against Julian Assange. And now, since they had some idea of what the defense was preparing for the September 7th hearing, they move forward and decide that they're going to add extra details to it so that it dresses it up and makes it look a little better. Now, they know they can't add additional charges and get away with it, but they're pretty certain that they can get away with it with this judge by adding extra narration to it that suggests that he's a hacker and not a journalist, and plays into a lot of tropes and disinformation that we've been fed in the mass media about Julian Assange over the last years. And they take advantage of it. And what happens is Vanessa Baretzer decides in her courtroom during this proceeding that she's not going to do anything to fix this. And she has that authority, but she's not going to force the prosecutors to do anything to conform with these due process rights that should be available to Julian Assange. And so the defense made a request that they toss out this third indictment, claiming it's illegitimate because the second indictment is the one that followed the rules, and this one tried to get around the deadline and abuse the deadline process. And so she says, well, if you want to make that an issue, you can file in some writing, or you can make it formally bring this as an issue at the beginning of the September 7th hearing. Because now Julian Assange is going to, in September, be brought before the court and rearrested under this third indictment, and then they'll go onward with it. But, you know, an outstanding issue is, what about this February hearing? The February hearing took place under the old indictment that doesn't exist anymore. So since this third indictment has new information in it, do we need to have a new legal? We have another week hearing where we go over legal issues. So I might be a little confusing here in the way I'm describing all of this, but what we've had is a 1 week long legal hearing for people who are following his case. And that 1 week hearing was all about the law around extraditing him to the United States. And it was all about whether the U.S. actually has the authority to bring him to the United States. And whether
to flesh out the timeline a little bit, because this is something you had talked about in a few of your tweets as well as your video.
Yeah.
So February hearing happened. We're into June 22nd, I believe the date was. The defense team submitted all of their evidentiary hearing things. Like, they got in all the paperwork and stuff that they needed. And then 2 days later, on June 24th, is when this new indictment came out, correct?
Yeah.
And since then, the second expanded indictment was null and void because the first one was released. And the thing you talked about, which I think is super important to drive home, is the fact that since June 24th, Julian Assange is being held in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom without any actual arrest.
Yeah.
That's going to be a date going forward that we add to our countdown calendar, like the days since the third indictment was placed, or some way of wording it. Or until they rearrest him, days since Julian Assange has been in prison without charge. Because I think that's super important for people to drive home, because there is so much nuance and detail in this. But for almost 2 months now, Julian has had no charges over top of him. And this was during the same time period where the judge said that they're not going to release him because he has nothing and has not been charged with anything.
Yeah, so I come at this as an American. I don't really understand the UK justice system fully, but I imagine if I was charged with burglary and they dropped the charge against me but kept me in jail and didn't let me go out and go free because, by the way, you've just been charged with Grand Theft Auto or some other version of this crime. It's just different. And then I would say, well, but, that's a whole new case that you're bringing. Don't I need to go to a courtroom and be read my rights? And I get to be asked, do I understand what I'm being charged? And maybe I can object. He actually, and I would have another opportunity to try and get bail for that charge, because the first time I didn't win. And then now, even though that sounds like a worse charge, I would have an opportunity to still say, I don't think I should spend my time in pretrial confinement.
Well, if you were in the state of California under the Kamala Harris AG position and the court said release this person, somehow a prosecutor in the U.S. has the power to say no and sue the system that they're working for to say, no, we need these people in slavery. So I think court systems are foreign in general in the way that they're allowed to operate, more so than just in the UK, because when you peel that little curtain back in the US, you see that same dystopian horror process as punishment system.
Yeah, this is exactly, the process is the punishment, and that's what Julian has spoken about for a number of years, and that's what we're witnessing right now. From start to finish, this case has been a real-time exercise in the erosion of rule of law. And the reason that I've been referring to Vanessa Breitzer as the concierge of the U.S. State Department has a lot to do with her going, well, I don't really have any power in my own courtroom. I can't make these decisions. I'm just the final arbiter of what happens here. So, it's not really, it's out of my control. It is. You're going to have to go jump through a number of other different hoops in order to satisfy what the prosecution and the UK court system is supposed to do in any other case on the planet.
Yeah. Well, just to finish my point that I was making was,
sorry about that,
to say that, my maybe more charitable than it should be assessment of how courts go in the United States aside, I think that Julian Assange and his people under this new indictment should have another opportunity to press for bail, because it's an entirely new indictment. And so they should try again, even if they're going to fail, just so that they can jam the court again, jam the U.S. prosecutors, create another round of headlines that are embarrassing because they're keeping this person in a maximum security prison during a time when all experts around the world are saying that that's a bad thing to do with pretrial defendants, because there's still a pandemic in our globe. And also beyond that, just for his individual case, we're not talking about violence that he allegedly committed. It's all nonviolent, and it's totally absurd that he's treated as somebody who would flee and wouldn't remain in the UK to face this case. I just don't think that rests on any evidence whatsoever that he would. And also, I don't believe for a moment that the security state of the UK or the US security state would let him go anywhere. And if he didn't remain, and by the way, let me just entertain the wild conspiracy that maybe isn't not so wild, that if he did try to flee, then we just see federal agents straight up snatch him and take him to the U.S. so that they get around this whole extradition business. And then they'd come up with some retroactive way to justify that they were able to pick him up because he fled home confinement, and they could just bring him to the United States. I mean, I don't even know what legal case they would make, but we've seen through torture and warrantless wiretapping how there's Justice Department lawyers who get paid to make up law and justify these kinds of gross acts. So I think that that's something I want people to know, is that there should be another opportunity going forward here to try to get Julian Assange out of jail.
So the rumor or the conventional wisdom now is that on September 7th, the day that his evidentiary hearing is supposed, or witness hearing is supposed to begin, that's when he'll be rearrested on these new charges, or this on new indictment, because there aren't any new charges, or just expanded. This whole thing is a fucking mess, man. It is. It's one of the more complicated tasks just to keep everything straight in your head, to be able to relay information about it. Andrew and I were on a show last night, and the host was like, okay, you got 5 to 7 minutes to explain everything that's gone on with Julian Assange in the last decade. It's like, I'm going to go a little over time, fuck. It's mad. It's so maddening. And the fact that they dropped this bombshell in the midst of all of this chaos that's surrounding the hearing, not just COVID, not just the erosion of rule of law, not just the gross violation of basic human rights, plus all legal rights, plus all civil liberties that should be afforded to Julian Assange. Then they're like, oh, and by the way, we're going to leave you in legal limbo for a period of months, much like we left you in legal limbo with the Swedish assault case for years and years and years, because it is more convenient for the U.S. State Department, for the British court system, and for the U.S. legal system to put you in fucking stasis than have us go through this trial. Like, that's what fucking kills me. This isn't the first time they've done this to Julian Assange, not even this year. It's just it makes me irked. It does. It irks me.
So one of the things I want to touch on here, and if Josh could pop it up real quick, it's the Stella Morris tweet. It's listed as number 2 on our show doc. And this is the one that says, at Westminster Magistrates Court with Julian's father, Julian's hearing is delayed so that he can have his first and only video link meeting with his UK extradition lawyers since March, before today's hearing begins. And so we knew early that Julian was listed as unwell, that he wasn't in a good condition to meet via video link to even attend his own trial, let alone meet with his lawyers, because those links, those video conferences are extremely surveilled. It's literally ran by the prison and a more or less private intelligence company. So I believe it was the last, not this one Friday, but the last case management hearing before that was the first time that Julian actually appeared in court for 4 hearings in a row. This is the first time he's gotten a meeting with his legal team. And as you outlined, Kevin, it's because the prosecution was late on top of everything, to where if it had kicked off at 10, they probably wouldn't have had a chance to meet with him in that way, just from the way you were kind of describing the situation and circumstance. Mm-hmm. And then the don'textraditeassange.com article, that press release that we were digging into, it says, and that it was only part of the chaos in the morning in which Belmarsh Prison did not initially bring Julian to the video room to join the proceedings. The U.S. prosecution failed to turn up, having gotten the wrong hearing time, and every journalist and NGO observer had tried to dial in was directed to another trial entirely. So they even brought him late to the meeting that they had set the wrong time at. It's fucking mind-boggling that, like, to Steve's point about trying to keep it all straight, like, they are intentionally trying to make this circumstance as complicated as they can. Yeah.
And so I also want to point out what Rebecca Vincent said at Reporters Without Borders, who I think have done very respectable work raising press freedom issues in this case. And she tweeted, "I have never in my career faced so much difficulty attempting to trial monitor as in Julian Assange's case, whether in person or remotely. There are constant barriers to access. Completely unacceptable." And then they mentioned that Reporters Without Borders will again be writing to the court as well as the Ministry of Justice in the UK. So just so people are aware, that, like, this didn't just start at the case management hearing. What Rebecca is referring to are things that were experienced throughout the last months during COVID, where time and time again, there have been journalists who have tried to get on this conference call line to hear case management hearings and have been unable to do so. Additionally, with Assange, his legal team have had trouble getting him scheduled for a video so that he can join the proceedings via video, with the court sometimes even denying that link because they claim that Belmarsh can't accommodate that today. So then he doesn't join the management hearing. But if we go back to February, I remember the start of that 1-week hearing was this absurd image of journalists all crowded at the front of a media center that is basically like a shed that was set up outside of the British courthouse and put there. And everyone had to gather very close to this flat screen television and try to hear the audio, because the court would not turn it up so that we could hear in the courtroom the feed. But then also the court wasn't instructing both the defense and the prosecution to speak into their microphones so that we could follow along. Basic things that should go into managing a hearing in which you know that the press and the public are attending. Basic things that go towards transparency as well as due process rights, so that you can guarantee that the defendant is able to have public observers who know what is happening in the case. And so we've seen all throughout that there is this complete indifference. She just does not care about whether transparency for these proceedings. She does not care if Julian Assange's due process rights are respected. And so this is what we've had to deal with. And we keep flailing around trying to get someone within maybe a clerk's office in these courthouses to give a shit about our complaints, because the judge isn't going to. So we were hoping to reach some bureaucrat who will fix this so that we can do our jobs.
I gotta think at this point that the fact that there isn't one clerk lifting a finger to push a button to make it accommodable for journalists to be able to report on this, that's not because they haven't been taught how to do their job. It's not because, oh, one guy made a mistake that day. There's a mandate throughout the UK court system that says, don't,
Yeah.
or we'll fucking fire you. You know, and for Rebecca Vincent to call it unacceptable, the word unacceptable gets thrown out every single time that Julian Assange's case is brought up with any person of conscience. Anyone whatsoever who looks at this on its face will reach the very logical conclusion that this is unacceptable. Well, what's the next step? Fucking do something about it. And that's why we're going back to DC. That's why we're making sure that there are people in the UK that can fucking actually cover this legitimately. But we need the people who are saying this is unacceptable to really come together with us, get on board, and fucking do something about it.
But there are 2 points that need to be made here. First off, I think that there are probably very good, I know there are good, and I'm not talking about the folks at The Guardian. I'm talking about people I know who I met at the courthouse who are based in the UK. There are good UK journalists there who are going to do work, but only about 5 or 6 of them are going to be allowed into the courthouse.
Yeah.
And beyond the fact that a low number are going to be allowed because of social distancing guidelines at the Old Bailey, this is an American case in which a person who is from Australia is being extradited by the U.S. and the U.S. is claiming this person does not have First Amendment rights, and they're trying to bring a foreigner to the United States and put them on trial under the Espionage Act here in the United States. It is unprecedented. There is no case like this at all. We say, I'm sure you've repeated that word unprecedented so many times that you have lost track, and if you had been keeping count, you probably could have fed the hungry of an entire village. But like this is the way it is, and yet there's nothing done by this court, and we need to impress upon them that American journalists, I know this comes out like really exceptionalist, and people get sick and tired of U.S. people acting like they're the center of the world and more important than other countries. But this is an American case in which if American journalists can't follow along and report on it, there is no way we can expect UK journalists to fully pick up on all the nuances and idiosyncrasies of this case, because they're not aware of how the U.S. justice system works. They just don't live here. They don't know the history. They don't know the war on whistleblowers that has led up to going after Julian Assange. They don't know the Jeffrey Sterling case. They don't know the John Kiriakou case. They don't know the Reality Winner case. They don't know Stephen Kim's case, Shamai Leibowitz's case. They don't know all of these cases that are being invoked to go after Julian Assange. They don't know Jeffrey Rosen, who's a journalist at Fox News, who was treated like a co-conspirator of a leaker. So that perhaps sets a precedent for going after Julian Assange. They don't fully understand the way the grand jury process works, because hell, we had this medieval system of a grand jury that only Liberia, which was a colony of the US, had. So like there's only 2 places left that have this grand jury system that was used to issue indictments against Assange. And So we absolutely have to have American journalists who are on the line and can follow. And since I'm rolling, let me add a second rant to this, because I say that the U.S. military gave Chelsea Manning a more open and fair proceeding than this UK magistrate court has been able to grant and give Julian Assange. And so let's break that down. I mean, what does that actually mean? Because the military is what Julian Assange exposed with WikiLeaks, exposed how U.S. soldiers were committing torture and war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, exposed how the body count for those wars were being tremendously undercounted, if they were even being counted at all as far as Iraqi civilians go. I think they were even found to be undercounting the deaths of U.S. troops. And we have Guantanamo files. The United States military is responsible for Guantanamo Bay, and they lied about hundreds of people that were rounded up and brought there, said they were the most dangerous terrorists in the world. And it turns out that like most of them were like bakers and cooks and chefs and clerks and teachers and stuff like that. And some of them have maybe gone to camps, but they were, if anything, just like militants involved in local conflicts within their countries. They weren't people who were associated with anyone that could be tied back to 9/11. And so this is what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exposed: the crimes and the disinformation and the propaganda of the U.S. military. And yet the U.S. military gave Chelsea Manning a more fair and just proceeding than this UK magistrate court, a completely corrupt institution that has nearly 1,000 military bases around the world, that has set up a global empire in order to control and dominate, gives people who are charged with leaking this information a fair process than this UK magistrate court. And it flies in the face of everything we think we might understand about this world, because I think that makes it so that there absolutely are no excuses. I mean, I think it leads you to believe that there must be something going on in the background that we will learn about at a later date as to how this court isn't really making independent decisions. It is, in fact, functioning as an extension of the U.S. Justice Department.
Well, for my own edification, will people will you put, because you put this on wax, you did that, exactly what you just said. It's in a tweet. It is fucking brilliant. For my own edification, can we just make a pact now to refer to Baraitser as a concierge for the U.S. State Department so the people understand it a little bit better?
I will adopt that verbiage. I will use that to describe her.
I got Danny Sherson on board too. I feel like we could really go somewhere with that. I had to explain real quick, Andrew. Sorry, I had to explain to Daniel fucking Ellsberg in an email why it's important for people in the United States to be upset about this and to want to hold demonstrations in the United States. Like, I get that Daniel Ellsberg is now, like, I mean, the guy's like 3 weeks older than baseball. Like, I understand, but like, this is the Pentagon Papers dude who is like, I don't understand why you would want me for a panel event in the United States because everything's happening in London. No, London is a venue. The United States, the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. State Department, U.S. intelligence agencies are the people who are putting all of this in motion. So if you don't take the fight to them and put it right in their face, you're fucking missing out. And then finally he was like, oh, okay, now I get it. Oh, okay, you already did that too, and you're coming back to do it again. And okay, it's starting to, but like, for me to have to explain that to Daniel fucking Ellsberg, like, imagine how just a beat reporter in fucking, Evansville, Indiana is looking at this situation. Like, this doesn't concern me at all. So that's one thing that, like, I'm going to personally be focusing on over the next few weeks, is how to make this sink in. to U.S. based journalists. And I don't know if anybody has any suggestions. I am completely open to your advice, and I will fucking incorporate it and use it. I promise. Like I'm not capable of doing this by myself.
Well, I have one, but it's kind of like vapid or empty. But you could try it because that's the way most of our media is in the United States, anyways. But everyone knows that back in 2016, Donald Trump was like, "Yeah, WikiLeaks, like we got these WikiLeaks," and he was excited about them. And now he's just totally silent and cold and doesn't speak about this at all. And oddly enough, it looks like we have more of a chance to get a pardon for Edward Snowden than we do to get Julian Assange's case dropped against him, which I never would have imagined. But that's bizarro world for you. That Trump might be the one who pardons someone who's in Moscow and lets Julian Assange continue to rot in a jail cell. Not that one deserves more punishment than the other. I think both should be free and able to live their lives.
So I got a whole bunch of notes, but on the point of the Trump being the person to actually do this, I think really from a strategic standpoint, one of the best ways to actually affect the change to force Trump's hand, so to speak, is to go to Trump's rallies and to Trump's bases events, even if it's not Donald Trump there, but just his base going and doing something. Go to his website, donaldtrump.com, because they're all there. Go to his events and pass out free Assange shit. Like, give them flyers, give them signs, go to his mega rallies and focus on one specific issue and hand people free Assange posters to take inside. Because what happens is it either forces, if you have enough posters, forces the security guards that are screening people as they come in to take those posters in support of Julian from Trump's base as like, why the hell are you taking this poster? Or puts it in his face to the point that half of the people are holding a free Assange sign above their head instead of a Trump sign. Yeah. And I'm not a Trump supporter. I think he is a demonstrable human being, to word it as politely as I can. But I think throwing it back in his face that he ran on We Love the WikiLeaks and that his base demands this is one direct avenue to get Julian's freedom, at least by the stroke of Trump's pen.
Yeah. So did you, I see we're going to be running out of time soon. Did you want me to run down this hearing and who we're going to be potentially hearing from? And also, this is just to make the point that this hearing has to happen in September, and we should want it to happen, and we don't really want to see it delayed any longer than it has to be, because he sat in this jail cell for a long time, in this prison cell for a very long time, and this is the crucial hearing. This is the only time that they will be able to bring evidence in the extradition case, because after they do this with the witnesses, then it goes into the record, then Baretzer reviews it all, then she issues her decision. Since we know from Declassified UK that 96% of the cases she has approved, so she's a rubber stamper, so she's going to stamp it, but then we'll go to an appeal court, and all that evidence will be in the record, and you won't hear from witnesses being called, and you won't see this brought freshly again. It will all be referring to an old record in the appeals, and it will be rather eye-glazing kind of arguments in these appeals courts, things that are hard to follow because they're lawyer or barrister arguments over points of process that make us all feel kind of like ill and tired inside. And so this is the big hearing. This is when anything that is a bombshell against the U.S. government that relates to how they handle this case is going to come out in this 3 or 4 week hearing. Anything that the defense has that can impeach and embarrass the U.S. government is going to be put on the record here to expose this case. So we've got professors that are going to come forward to examine how this is a political case, how it involves political opinions. There are going to be people who are experts on the U.S. prison system who come forward to describe the risk of exposure to inhuman treatment. That's been a way to stop extradition, like the extradition of Lori Love was one that involved bringing this issue out. And then they'll probably put on some on the record some evidence related to the espionage operation that took place against the UK embassy while he was against the Ecuador embassy while he was in the embassy, with the Spanish private security company UC Global being behind it. But the names of these people are Mark Feldstein, who is an academic from broadcast journalism. There's Carrie Shankman, who does a lot of work studying the Espionage Act. And then there's Jamil Jaffer, who is with the Knight First Amendment Institute, and he used to be with the ACLU. Professor Michael Tigar is a former journalist and an academic. These were listed in one of the filings that the legal team had back in February. Noam Chomsky was expected to testify in support of Julian Assange. There's Professor Paul Rogers. Patrick Eller is a former U.S. Army investigator and expert in digital forensics, and his work is crucial because to hear from him, he's going to unpack the bogus nature of this allegation that he conspired to crack a password with Chelsea Manning. So that's why he's being called. John Getz is an international investigative journalist who worked with Der Spiegel, and he's someone who's going to deal with what was going on in the handling of that material. There's also Jacob Augustine, who's with Der Freitag, or was with Der Freitag during this time that they were handling the releases. There's Emily Discher-Becker, who was working in Beirut at the relevant time, and she had a media partnership with WikiLeaks, and we'll talk about how they actually did work to minimize impact on opposition activists in Lebanon. Sami Ben-Garbia is a journalist based in Tunisia who will, again, go through one of the things that is a crucial part of the U.S. case, allegedly, as they claim, is that he didn't do what was necessary to redact identities and to protect people. And so the legal team has lined up these individuals to show that that's not true. And they have this Tunisia-based journalist to show that there was concern about not harming, making sure that people were not harmed. Professor Christian Grothoff is a professor of computer science, and they actually spell out what he's going to testify to, which is at the time when the WikiLeaks site republished the unredacted cables, the information was already easily available to any technically competent person. And so that's a big deal because part of the case is that he allowed to be published over 250,000 diplomatic cables that had all kinds of names of informants and human rights activists and people who could be attacked and killed. And so the issue here is to show that it's actually the U.S. government that lost control of that information. They're the ones that had a responsibility to protect these people. They failed, and it's not on Julian Assange what happened. And there were other people who had compromised those identities before. Eric Lewis is a practicing lawyer in the U.S. who's going to deal with the trial and sentencing issues that have come up. Barry Pollock was listed in this filing. We know him as a U.S. lawyer for Julian Assange. Robert Boyle is an expert on grand juries, so he'll likely testify on the Chelsea Manning contempt proceedings. Thomas Durkin, I know Thomas Durkin because I'm from Chicago, and he's based and has done work around this area. He's a big national security attorney. He actually defended some people here in the state who were accused of state terrorism charges around the NATO summit that took place in 2012. That's an additional detail that has nothing to do with Assange, but he's very good at the issues of the government going after activists and dissenters. So he's a good voice to bring forward. Eric Lewis is going to deal with I already mentioned him. Yancey Ellis is an experienced lawyer who's from the area of Virginia, who's going to deal with trial and pre-trial detention issues. Then there's Joel Sickler, who's going to examine prison conditions. Professor Koppelman is, so then the last few that I have on this list are doctors and psychiatrists who have provided treatment to Assange over the course of this last decade. Dr. Sandra Crosby is probably the most well-known of the bunch because she went to the Ecuador embassy and put together a report that documented his health. And also she was the one who exposed how there was a psychological operation going on against Assange and people who were visiting, and how it was actually targeting her. And she even alleged that the embassy stole her doctor notes from her and we're manipulating them. So anyways.
What I'm hearing from all of this is that it's going to be 100% vital that the press has access to these hearings, and that journalists actually get a chance to proliferate this information beyond the bubbles that algorithmic censorship keeps us in.
That's exactly right. Yeah, all of these people, I want to be able to hear their witness testimony, and unlike the legal hearing, there is no way. This may seem like something that average citizens should not concern themselves with, but this is how it works. The legal hearing was pretty easy to cover because the defense and the prosecutors could draw up legal arguments, and they could hand out those arguments to journalists. So even if we don't understand what they were saying in the courtroom, we could see this paper and we could use it to make sure that the right stuff got out to people from both sides. We're not going to have that for witness testimony. You can't hand out what witnesses are going to say. You don't know what they're going to say. Well, you kind of can predict if you're the legal team for WikiLeaks, but I don't know what they're going to say in response to the prosecutor's questions. So we need journalists who are able to get this information out and follow along. So it's crucial that people respond to your calls to action and put pressure on the court to do more to ensure that there's transparency. The only way that they're going to do differently is if we shame them. That's the only way anything ever gets done in this world. It's constant and true country to country. We have to make them look absolutely foolish and despicable and shame them into granting us access. Because what we've been doing so far has been respectful and courteous, and it hasn't worked. So we need to up and intensify what we're doing in order to get this access.
I feel oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I just want to thank you very much for joining us, Kevin, and I could not agree more on that. I do want to leave. We still have some news to get to after this, but that's the second part of the show here. I do want to leave you with a quote from Jocelyn, that Jocelyn put in chat. It's by John Wright. Julian Assange is languishing in Belmarsh prison this evening, not in the name of British justice, but in the name of subservience to Washington. So if you could, Kevin, please let people know where they can find you and your work, and potentially anything else you have coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, so I want to thank everyone who follows your show for supporting my work. I'm sure that some of you have been introduced to what I've done over the last couple of months thanks to this show that you're doing weekly. So I'm glad to be able to talk with you about Assange. I have a newsletter that goes out weekly on whistleblower stories and also provides WikiLeaks update. You can find that at dissenter.substack.com, dissenter.substack.com. I'm the managing editor for shadowproof.com. We do a whole range of work around WikiLeaks, whistleblowers, and other related issues involving prisons. Some of that stuff that actually relates to what Julian's going through right now in Belmarsh, actually, and what he would face if he's brought to the United States. And then I'm the co-host of a weekly show called the Unauthorized Disclosure Podcast, and also it connects to my newsletter, but I do a weekly show talking about the whistleblower stories from the past week, just running down things that have developed. And so I thank you for having the opportunity to share this. And going forward, I don't actually know where I'm going to be to cover this September 7th hearing, but I promise whether I'm there or doing so remotely that I'm going to get steady coverage out about what's happening with Julian Assange's hearing.
And thank you again. We really appreciate you having me on here with us.
Yeah. And go watch Unauthorized Disclosure. If you're watching this show right now, fantastic. Just incredible information that comes out of there every week.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. So before we transition into a couple more pieces of news, because I think we only have like 3 or 4 things left to cover, I do just want to give a shout out again to the first part of this week's call to action. By this week, I mean the week of the 59th or the 59th week, which technically starts tomorrow, but I'm getting it out a day early just because I feel like we have too much to do right now. This first one coming out is for people to contact the ASLEF. And this is just what Wikipedia says in their little opening section. The The Associated Society of Locomotive Engineers and Firemen is a British trade union representing train drivers. It is part of an International Transportation Workers Federation and the European Transportation Workers Federation. At the end of 2018, the ASLEF had about 22,000 members. I think their current numbers, according to their website, float somewhere around 19 to 20,000, just depending on what the article date is. But they had a member put out a letter, and I just want to real quickly go over a little bit of this. If you could get it pulled up real quick, Josh. So this letter was to Mick Whelan, who is the general secretary for the ASLEF. And I'll put the link to the tweet in here or into the chat for everybody as well. But it basically outlines more or less everything that we've talked about. But the big key points here are the resolutions. And they requested that the EC support this resolution. This is a definitive free speech case of the 21st century. To campaign to stop the extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S., the Don't Extradite Assange campaign's website, and provides the link to it as well as their Facebook. To write to the Home Secretary, the Shadow Home Secretary, and the Shadow Justice Secretary, making the trade union's case on this issue. And for everybody who doesn't know or hadn't heard about it or slipped their memory, there is a motion in the lower House of Commons in the UK to come out in support of Julian. I believe that's tabled, which in the UK means they're actually going to talk about it. In the US, that means something different in politics. But our call to action is to send the people in the ASLEF this information. I went on their website. I pulled as many emails as I could reasonably find that I think people could reach out to. So please share this letter with these different members and the different emails listed on here for the call to action, but also share the National Union of Journalists statement in support of Julian. Because that's what started the trade unionists groups coming out in support of him. So I just ask that if you can, please send those, because this is a chance that we have to make a really big difference here.
There.
But, right. So I think
I was pulling up Mo's article and trying to skim it for the stuff that we had already touched on in the DEA summation of the hearing.
Yeah. Joe and Mo's articles are pretty similar to the ones that we had talked about. I just put them in there just to have the links. But
just to fuck with Josh.
Well, no, because I didn't know how we were going to cover it or how long it would take. But I love you, Josh.
30 scenes. There's like 30 scenes.
I know. I know. There was a lot. It was a big day. Do we want to talk about the protests outside of the court?
Sure. Let's do that. Let's give a big shout out to F Press too. If you're not and you are on Twitter, it's at EF Press. He's been filming every single action that has taken place around Julian's hearings and the weekly protests for months and months and months and months. Oh, that's not my driveway. Never mind. I don't have to get up and grab a gun and freak out. Anywho, well, we're just showing the tweet here. That's all we're doing. Okay.
What
Big shout out to
What am I supposed to be showing?
And last time they did this, everybody got fined. I believe that the people who were there received fines for not complying with social distancing or mask requirements, because the UK went like full authoritarian with how they're rolling out their lockdown, essentially. So I don't think we've heard anything about that this time. But the one last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is something kind of interesting that I don't really want to get into too much, and this is just number 10. This is Millie Weaver, because I feel like it's worth mentioning here. Millie Weaver, I believe, works for InfoWars. She was releasing a documentary by whistleblowers from private intelligence companies
Called
and
Shadowgate.
called Shadowgate, and got arrested mid-premiere, like swatted and taken out mid-premiere. And it's terrible. It should not have happened. I don't know essentially what it's about, but if it's in regards to literally just releasing a documentary on the internet, then that's fucking wrong. But to InfoWars and to the people in those spheres, and this isn't the watchers of them, this is the people there that make content and organize and do those things. In February, Steve, myself, Kimber, and our group went to the Alex Jones Emergency Free Speech Summit. And we told them, if you cannot make this happen, if you cannot make Julian Assange's issue front and center, when he is gone, you are gone, right? And so I just want to point this out to them for if this message will even get to them, that that is the first step in that, because they have free reign to arrest whatever journalists they want right now, unless they can be stopped in this process.
Let me put a cherry on top of that too. Dear Nick Fuentes, we fucking told you. We told you months ago exactly what would happen. We told you without using Millie Weaver's name, without knowing that it would be Millie Weaver specifically. We told you this exact
Millie Weaver
thing would happen
first, because they're going to come for more people. Millie Weaver first.
Yeah. And without knowing that it would be Millie Weaver, we told you this exact thing would happen. And Nick Fuentes went, well, all he has to do is rat out his source. Do you feel like Millie Weaver should be a rat? She's on your team. Do you want someone on your team to be a rat? You've got to look at journalism as we're all on the same fucking team if our objective is to expose truth through journalism. Now, if your objective is to run a narrative that doesn't belong to you, you need to admit up front that you're not a journalist, Nick. You need to admit up front that you're a propagandist, and you need to be comfortable enough in your propaganda to be proud of it. So be proud of it or get on fucking board, because you're next.
I would like to thank everyone for joining the final episode of the 58th week of the Free Assange Vigil, and I look forward to seeing everybody Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. You can find us on the internet at action4assange.com, and on Twitter at action_4assange. I appreciate Kevin joining us. I appreciate everybody watching and engaging in chat. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Kimber, and everyone else helping to organize for the DC protests and helping organize the vigils behind the scenes here. Thank you.
My name's Steve Poikin, and I host a show called Slow News Day. If you're looking for it on YouTube, you can find it by typing in Slow News Day podcast into your search bar. The fantastic Garland Nixon will be joining me tomorrow.
Hell yeah.
Really looking forward to that. I am also on Rockfin and D Live, and given the way that YouTube has just casually announced that they're now state fucking media and that they're going to remove any and all videos that show whatever it is they determine to be hacked material, I highly encourage you guys to go make a Rockfin account. I love you guys. I do. Thank you for hanging out in the chat today. Special thanks to Rob Juno and Tobin and Tequil for your super chats. You guys fucking rock. I will definitely make sure that that this gets added to Josh's cold beer fund. Although I think I have alternative plans for the cold beer fund, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. Big thanks to Kevin Gosztola for being our guest today, to Andre for Jazz Handrew for co-hosting with me. Thanks, Sleepy Josh and the Mean Panda, and we will catch you guys on Tuesday. Good luck to us all.